All right, hey everybody. I'm excited to have Nina Ayala, art therapist for Integrative Life Center, on the webinar today to talk about art therapy through a screen. The COVID pandemic has forced all of us to reorient how we do work. And so she's going to be sharing today with me some things to how she's switched a little bit of what she does to be virtual through Zoom and other platforms for the groups that she helps and supports at ILC. So Nina, welcome to the webinar today. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Corey. I'm happy to be here.
So I know this has been a challenge for all of us, but what's some of the biggest, challenges for as you have translated art therapy, what you do and do for those in treatment at ILC to the virtual? You were saying before we started here that you've got, I said, hey, is it one group in front of one computer, or is it spread out and you've got it all over the map, I think?
That's right. So with art therapy over Zoom, one of the biggest limitations is just being able to coordinate, having everyone at the same place, and also having materials. So with traditional work or therapy or more talk therapy, you can meet up and it's great. But with art therapy, you want to make sure that there are tools in place. So getting the right materials to the locations. If someone is not already part of, say, like a residential group, and they're just coming in for therapy for treatment, then making sure prior to the meeting that they are prepared so that they can have the tools to work with. And then just having a plan in place. Lots of preparation.
Yeah, we're gonna dive into all of that a little bit deeper as we go through the webinar, but I want to remind everybody, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom app and you can ask your questions for Nina today. Nina Ayala has been with Integrative Life Center almost a year now, doing art therapy for clients at ILC. Okay, so let's talk about art therapy in general. And it's been a couple of months now that I've been introduced to art therapy, and I'm just enamored, and I can't wait for us to get to the exercises you have for us today. But can you talk about a little bit of the pros and the approach about art therapy, particularly with recovery?
Sure, absolutely.
Some of the advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. So art therapy, it's an amazing way for people to increase self-awareness. When they get creative, they are accessing parts of their brain that they may not normally access. So if someone's very analytical, then they might see a shift once they get creative. When you make these shifts, you also access parts of your subconscious, and that increases your self-awareness. It increases your ability to identify what's important to you. Art therapy for adults especially can be a little intimidating initially because we may not have used art supplies unless it's something that we normally enjoy doing as part of a hobby or a profession. But generally for adults, there might be some anxiety around, I can't draw a stick figure. I have had many sessions where new clients have said that, and by the end of the session experienced transformations. With art therapy, I always introduce my groups by saying, what we're doing today is not for a greater critique. It is far more about the process, and it'll be a way for you to express yourself. It's a way for you to just relax with the tools and learn a little bit more about who you are and how you approach things. And that people find as they let go of that anxiety, that they can use art as a tool to express difficult emotions, resolve emotional conflicts, cope with traumas in different ways. In the recovery space, it can even be introduced as a new coping tool to help people manage addictions, manage behavior. So art therapy is just a wonderful way to get people creative, explore, their inner selves, and see art as a process and not something that's for grade or critique or trying to make a finished work of art. So definitely emphasizing it's the process.
I really love that, because for someone like me that sometimes has struggles identifying the emotions that are under the surface, it feels like, especially when you kind of take off that this is not for a greater critique, which is probably what a lot of people think, that you take off that and just say, no, this is for you and you only, an expression of your emotions. I really love that approach, and why I've been drawn to art therapy too, and wanting to learn more about it. Okay, there are limitations with some art therapy, and you talked about it. Like, one of the key ones, doing it over a screen, I should say, through virtually. And I think you talked about one, which is making sure you have supplies, for the person. But as we talked today in the exercise you're going to talk about, are things that we can find within our homes today. So what are some of those limitations, though, beyond that too? And then how can we adjust to do that better virtually?
Yes, absolutely. So, with art therapy, when you're there in person, one of the pros to being in person is, for myself as an art therapist, I always like to, check in with my clients, and just kind of walk around as people are creating, and you can see people kind of going into that state of flow. You can see very clearly when someone is losing track of time, and the art that they're working on is all they're focusing on. And you can really, really just be present. One of the biggest things in a therapeutic relationship, and I know this applies to both art therapists and all therapists, is the focus is on the relationship between the therapist and your client. And when you're there in person, you can see, if someone is working on something, if it is bringing something up, you can address them one-on-one. You can see, their approach to working. You can interact overall with the group. One of the limitations with the screen is you can see from a distance, but you're not right there in that space. However, it's still something that can be overcome just by continuously reminding the group, the clients, whether they're all at one location or you have a few in one location and one person zooming in from somewhere else, just reminding them, as you work, I'm here for you, I'm here to help. If you need help, whether it's with a technique or if you need to pause and reflect on something, just come to the screen and talk with me. And so that's one way to overcome that limitation.
So somebody asked specifically, and I'd love to get your take on this, is can you relate this to individual sessions or one-on-one with children online, as I'm doing as a child psychologist? So a child psychologist asking, how can you do this with a child online? As I'm doing this interview with you and conversation with you, I've got two children in the other side of the house doing online school right now. So I know this particularly about helping kids and online and things like that, but then translating it with therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely. So with children, this type of work, it can be translated to work with children as well. I think the biggest thing, like even with working adults, is having the preparation in place. So making sure that there's plenty of time to spend with the child on the session, and also having backup plans. So children may begin one activity and they may be drawn to something else. So making sure that prior to the session that there are enough supplies that will hold the child's attention, and also just the more practical things. Making sure that it's a time of day where the child might not be distracted by being hungry or tired or sleepy, or maybe they had a really intense homeschool session, right? So paying attention to time and making sure that that the child is comfortable. If it's a situation where maybe I know, especially with this time, there's a lot of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty, and a lot of times trauma or other issues might come up in therapy, making sure that the child is as comfortable as possible. So making sure if they have like a favorite teddy bear or a blanket, just having those supports in place so that they can have what they need in case something comes up that might be difficult for them.
Yeah, and I think, some of the probably same things of doing one-on-one sessions, making it the environment, whatever room they're in, distraction free, making sure they're comfortable. One thing just as a technologist as myself is perhaps even making the screen full screen so they can see you. And I think my kids are digital natives. We have an Alexa in the home, so they're used to having actually a fifth member of our house, which is Alexa, around. But I would think, making that screen big so you can focus on just the therapist is one thing. And just like we did before, I was mentioning yesterday when we were prepping for this, and I was mentioning, hey, I've got an art there, I'm doing hand lettering, I'm practicing hand lettering. And, just like that, being able to show it up to the screen and, sharing that stuff, I'm sure is part of that process too, of trying to recreate as best as possible the knee to knee, sharing the same air kind of experience with therapy.
Absolutely. I think there is absolutely a great power in being able to show examples. I think a lot of people can be visual learners. So being able to show this is what it might look like. Don't let it sway you too much. You want to make it your own, but here's an idea. And that is a great way to prepare for sessions, to have things to show so that people can see like, oh, this is what we're working towards.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about preparation, trying to recreate the therapeutic experience, through video as best as possible, distraction free. I close my door when I do these webinars, try to make it as quiet as possible and let people know I'm in here doing these type of things. Okay, so that's great stuff. If you have questions, by the way, for Nina Ayala, art therapist at Integrative Life Center, please hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom app, and we'll get to your questions as fast as we can. So let's switch gears, and now let's talk about the structure of an art therapy session. Nina, would you kind of share what that kind of looks like, the structure of an art therapy session?
Sure, absolutely. So with art therapy sessions, and this might be both online or in person, I always go in with a plan or goal in mind. Some of the goals that we work with, especially at Integrative Life Center, and I've also done art therapy at an inpatient psych hospital. So we talk, initially I go in with a plan or goal in mind. I try to get to know a little bit about the population, the clients, the patients, what is a challenge right now, whether it's something that has been coming up with their primary therapist, or maybe we're going to have more newer clients. So the goal is to try to ease anxiety. Some topics, in addition to the art, I always try to include, psychoeducational piece. So some topics I'll talk about things like healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, which is huge. Also coping skills. And I also enjoy a lot of mindfulness groups. Mindfulness and art go hand in hand. But to go back to, a structure, I'll go in with the preparation, okay, that this is our goal. And so what I'll do is I check in with each client, and sometimes I'll ask a question such as, name one thing you're grateful for today, especially if it's a gratitude-based group, just to get people comfortable with speaking in the group. And then after the introduction, get to know who my clients are. I'll go into an introduction about what art therapy is. I always like to remind people, like we said earlier, that it's not for greater critique, and it's much more about the process. And I also enjoy mentioning flow, being in a state of flow. And I like to connect that to, especially with people who aren't familiar with art, I like to connect it with things that people might already normally do. Because when you go into a state of flow, you're very creative, you're losing that track of time, you're in the moment. It's a very mindful activity. And I remind them of those benefits. And these are benefits that have come up in studies about art therapy. There's a lot of research behind, art therapy promoting being in a state of flow, and being in a state of flow can help your overall well-being. Then once I talk a little bit about art therapy, usually I would at that point either introduce the art activity, and to enhance the art activity, um, whether it's painting, drawing, collage making, um, whatever the topic is, I'll either bring in something like a guided meditation to help people relax even further before art making, a poem, an inspirational quote, or some psychoeducational material, just to reinforce, hey, this is what we're working towards. These are the goals for today, and then we're going to move into the art in order to help learn about ourselves, where we are with those goals, and reinforce what the goals, or what the therapeutic goal overall for the group is. And then from there, open it up to art making, and that's when I typically would hand out the art supplies, or if we're online, I would say, okay, feel free to choose what you want to work with. Choice is very important when it comes to art therapy, and I believe it's true of just about all populations. A lot of times when people are in treatment, whether it's for addictions, or even inpatient psych, or even older folks. I work with a lot of people also that have Alzheimer's and dementia. Being able to make choices is very important. A lot of times people will lose items like their cell phone, or will have different restrictions. So being able to have choice and say, you can choose what you're going to work with, you can choose what you're going to create. So putting that power in your client's hands is important. And then I give them the space to create. And I think, once they're creating, just encourage. One of the common misconceptions about art therapy is that art therapists will analyze work. And we do learn about things like graphic indicators. There are some things we see in art, but at the end of the day, as far as what the art means, it really is up to the client, because we're all so unique, we're all so different. A certain color might be significant for one person, it can mean something totally different for someone else. Maybe someone chose the color green because it was their grandmother's favorite color, or someone chose a specific symbol because it reminds them of something significant in their life. And so that leads to the very important part. After the artwork is done, I encourage everyone to share. I give everyone the opportunity to share and to discuss their process, and discuss any insights that came up during the art, and also just share how they felt. And one great thing that I've noticed is a lot of people who start out saying, I can't draw a stick figure, end up pretty pleased, and they say, wow, I can't believe I created this, or I lost track of time. I can't believe an hour went by. And now they have confidence in what they created, and oftentimes they were able to process or access some new information about themselves.
That's great. I wanted to mention too, one is the concept or the practice of art therapy, but then doing it through virtual, online, it presents some different challenges for sure. And I want to mention, I've been doing online work for 13, 14 years now. I've led teams that are remote, spread out over the globe. And so I wanted to offer a couple of tips too. One is, before this, Nina and I were, Nina and I were talking, we're getting prep and making sure video and audio is good. One thing is, we had a backup just to make sure of, earphones. So now I keep saying Nyla. I'm so sorry. Nina has headphones with a mic as a backup if some of the audio reverb happens, which, by the way, if you're doing online stuff, will happen. Yeah. So she's got a headphone set, and we can for sure suggest some of those to have. But having headphones is so key for the client too, by the way, because some audio echo things happen, and also the privacy, specifically if you're doing group work. I want to put in the chat here too, this webinar and some of the resources we're offering is part of the Integrative Life Network that ILC has just rolled out this month to do things like this, to offer resources to you. If you'll click on that link, you'll see, or copy and paste it into your browser, you'll see down below is 10 tips for doing video. So one thing, you know, as you're doing clients, and I wanted to say this from just the technology side, not the therapeutic side, I'm gonna leave that to Nina, but the technology side is there's 2 keys for online. If you're trying to make the technology fade away as much as possible and get to the therapy, you need to have good internet. That's for you and for your clients. So there's specifically, if you click on the link about 10 tips for online video in that link I sent you, you'll see you can run a speed test, for instance, and the second is audio and video. So we tested out Nina's microphone before. I could hear just fine. So that was really good to test. So if you conquer those 2 things with the online video, whether it's a group or one-on-one, you come a long way to doing video really well. And just like anything else, from, you mentioned, Nina, seniors, for instance, or any other segment that is not as familiar with the online technology, like a Zoom or a Doxy or whatever you're using, doing a quick onboarding or a hello or something like that is going to help, particularly with group work, I would think, Nina. You know, as you're doing that kind of work for ILC, you know, there's going to be bumps along the road with technology. And as best as we can make those things fade away or minimize those to get to the true work is absolutely key. Okay, so I wanted to mention that. Okay, so by the way, as we transition to the next section, which we're going to talk about the different interventions, Nina's got a couple of ones that I'm really excited about to do, because I'm going to, as soon as I can with my family today or tomorrow, do this one called the Healing Hands with my family. But in the meantime, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom app, and that's where you can ask questions. So be sure you ask your questions. Nina and I are here for you. So ask those there, and I'll bring them up as soon as I can to ask Nina. Okay, Nina, so in the different art therapy type interventions, can you go through a couple of those for us?
Sure, absolutely. And one of my favorite interventions, and this was one of the interventions I studied for my thesis work, is altered bookmaking. There is a lot of good research about it. Altered bookmaking is something that you can do with all populations, children, adolescents. I have worked with some adolescents in the past, and it worked really well with them, and adults. And I will show you what an altered book is. So here's an example of a book that otherwise would have been discarded, however, has been converted into a work of art. With altered books, you can create using collage. You can create on these by drawing on them. Here's another example of collage. Page here.
So this is taking an existing book and just turning it into an art piece. I look right there, like cutting a window out, for instance, and coloring.
Yes, and if you use a material like Mod Podge, folks who are familiar with crafting may use it. You can have pages stick together, and it makes little areas that almost feel like cardstock. Another thing that you do.
And by the way, we're going to have this recording available on the link that I sent you shortly afterwards, and we're going to have some links to things like Mod Podge that I'm not familiar with. But okay, sorry, Nina.
No, you're fine. Another thing that you can do with altered books is blackout poetry. Blackout poetry is when you hide the words that you don't want, and you highlight the words that you do in order to create a poem. So a lot of times these books end up becoming like visual journals, even unintentionally, because it does take time to work through them. You might find that you are, starting an altered book at one chapter in your life, and then as you move on in life, you just keep working on it, and it kind of documents your journey. Altered books can be really beneficial for recovery, because it's symbolizing, creating new chapters in your life, or just journaling your process, documenting your process. So this is one of my favorite interventions, altered books. Another one that I really like, Bridge to Recovery. And this was done in watercolor, a very, very simple drawing. And the idea behind this intervention is to visualize where whatever the challenge might be, whether it's substance use or any other type of recovery. Try to visualize what was in your past and where you want to go, and also what that bridge looks like. Some of the questions to ask yourself as you would work on this intervention: where are you on the bridge, and how solid is this bridge? And perhaps if the bridge can take you anywhere you want to go, where's it going to take you? So here's an example of a bridge to recovery intervention.
I like that. I like that. It's a before, it's a journey. It's a before and after, and there's that emphasis on where you're going. Love that. Thank you. I'm sorry, keep going.
Sure. I also, especially with guided meditations, I will often invite people to create art in response to what they visualized or experienced. I find that a lot of people might visualize being out in nature. Maybe they traveled to a place that they loved, and just having them try to take that image, take that mental imagery and put it down on paper. And it doesn't matter if it's just abstract colors, lines, shapes, just a piece of art, a gratitude or a safe place art to help remind them of a better time. Because a lot of times when people are faced with challenges, they may find themselves ruminating over the problem. And with meditations, especially thinking back to places or times in their life when things were better, can help break them out of that cycle. So some examples of response arts in nature. These are just some watercolor images. And when I introduce watercolor, I will always remind folks, it might be a technique that's a little less easy to control. However, it's also a very forgiving medium. So you can always add a little bit more water and use a napkin to dab the excess water and paint over it if you wish. And then I always remind people there's no right or wrong way. Anything you create in art therapy, it's yours to keep. It's for your process. So some examples of just gratitude.
I love this. The watercolor, when I was a teenager, my grandmother, was acrylics. And I love that you've started with something that is kind of forgiving, but a little bit more abstract too. The combination seems like it's very approachable to start with watercolors. Okay, that's fantastic. So we have a question, and I want to bring this up. I love these ideas. You mentioned preparation and utilizing supplies around the home. At what point do you ask clients to prepare, keeping in mind the limited time available in a session? So, you've given us a lot of things. Like one is I don't necessarily have watercolors here. So, but in that whole, how do you ask, and when do you ask clients to prepare?
So if as soon as I know that a session will take place, I will try to plan for that session. And if it's with ILC, for example, they have wonderful residential programs. I would plan in advance and gather the supplies that they needed. We had some at ILC on Music Row, and they were able to get those supplies transported. In this time right now when I imagine a lot of the art supply stores are not open. If you were doing a session with someone who couldn't have supplies brought over from a place like ILC, you can still order some supplies online, and even some of the more entry level art kits can still be very beneficial. Because the great thing about art therapy is it's so much more about the process, that you don't have to worry about purchasing very very specific like high-end canvases, or museum quality archival paper. As long as you have even student grade paper should be affordable and pretty easy to order and access.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, I've got 2 young children, so crayons are not a problem around here. But what are maybe some basic supplies you could recommend for, that give you kind of a wide range? Like if you were a nutritionist, I'd be saying, what are the staples of food I could have in my house to eat,
Sure.
eat better. But as an art therapist, I don't want to lead you necessarily, and you might go crayons, really. But what are some staples of art supplies that someone could have that would give them a range of things to be able to do?
I think that's a great question, and from what I have observed, especially with the Integrative Life Center clients, watercolor markers are very popular, and they're great because they're versatile. You can use them as markers, or you can use them to create watercolor pieces of art. Even if you don't have a brush, there are some kits that come with a little pen that looks like has a reservoir with a little brush tip. So things like watercolor markers. You can also get some solid drawing paper, some drawing paper. Color pencils are very good. Color pencils, a lot of people also enjoy coloring in things like mandalas. You might have seen the popularity of adult coloring books. And those are things that aren't necessarily, you might see some that say, art therapy on them. My take on that is art therapy is truly more about the relationship with the therapist and the client. But with that said, it can still be a great way to bring someone into art if they're very intimidated. And it's still a great way to do something creative that's enjoyable. So even things like that, color pencils, watercolor markers, even as far as like paint, even like a small acrylic paint set. And I choose acrylic over something like say oil, because oil is going to be a little pricier. Oil also is something that takes a long time to dry, so it might not be very practical. And a lot of fine artists will mix materials such as maybe even like linseed oil or turpentine. So not the safest type of materials that you would want if your client is a child, for example. So keeping in mind like who's going to be using the materials, and just trying to make sure that you choose materials that are safe, non-toxic, and even clay, working with clay, and even things around your house could work, like magazines for collage, Mod Podge, glue sticks. So things like glue sticks you could find pretty much at any office supply store, or even places like Walmart or Target will carry things like glue sticks. So
Yeah.
I think so far we have
Watercolor markers.
color pencils, drawing paper, watercolor paper too, I didn't mention it before, but if you're going to do anything with watercolor paper,
Yeah.
acrylic paints and brushes,
Okay.
and your glue sticks, scissors, and magazines.
Okay, we had a couple questions come in, and I understand where they're coming from, for sure. They talk about low income. They're potentially helping with students, and they're at home, and it's low income, and might not be able to send supplies and things like that. But ideas for how to create with these students who don't have much available to them. And I think Kira and Danica both kind of resonate around that, is how to with scrounge around, if going to Amazon, buying some water markers isn't an option for students. Some pretty low or affordable, very, very affordable or accessible ways to do that. Do you have some ideas for them?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and like you said, there are things that you can use around the house. Even taking things like buttons off of clothing for collage making, or things like even if you get like catalogs or magazines in the mail, sometimes travel catalogs will have some beautiful images. There are, I know here in Nashville, there are some places. Place that comes to mind is a place called Smart Art, where they get a lot of donated supplies, and a lot of programs and schools here will utilize them. But there are places like that. So and I know not everyone tuning in might be in this area, but there might be some local places that have low cost tools like that. Also, even taking things like just thinking about something that might be around the house, or maybe even things like cardboard could be used as the back of a piece of art. Also, any type of fabrics, you can use fabric for collage making. Any type of, if depending on where you live, even going outdoors. And I understand that if it's a low income community, it might not always be feasible. But if there's a way um, for the child or family to get out in nature and even gather things like leaves and twigs and sticks. You could even make art with found objects, and some of the materials that are the most affordable art supplies that I can think of would probably be things like glue sticks, because those are the things that you would find more like at Walmart. And even there are some art kits out there, and I know we've talked about this with ILC recently. There are some art kits out there that are as little as like $4.99 to $9.99. So like, even if the family couldn't afford it, if there was like some church funding or other funding, I know there's a really good program here in Nashville called My Canvas Arts, and I know one of the art therapists, or some of the art therapists that have been part of that program. And one of their biggest goals is to go out into the community and work with kids who do come from low income backgrounds and might have very little access. And so a lot of their funding does come from churches in the community. I hope that
Thanks.
helps.
Thanks, Nina. Yeah, great. Sorry, I disappeared for a minute in the web. You know how it goes. Web popped off for me, so I'm glad you're there. I caught the tail end of it, but I love the idea for nature. Jennifer mentions leaves, flower petals, soil, and a little water can make good pigment too. So
Yes.
I think that's part of it too, is engaging the creativity with permission. I wouldn't want a kiddo to pop the buttons or do something of, the parents are like, why did you do that?
Yes.
But making do with what you can get really creative. So that's excellent. If you have other questions for Nina, please hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom app and we'll get to those. We've got about 20 minutes left in our webinar today. And I'm talking with Nina Ayala, art therapist at Integrative Life Center. Okay, so we have a question here that came in. Let me see. Oh, what is your favorite, Jack asked, what is your favorite art therapy exercise?
My favorite art therapy exercise. So I think that's a great question, and it's going to lead into the exercise that we're going to do here together as a
Yeah,
group.
yeah.
So one of the exercises that I enjoy, and this is something that works well for folks, even if all you have is an ink pen. I like to call it healing hands, and I'll see if I can hold this up.
It's great.
And as you can see with this art intervention, I'll explain a little bit about it. Um, you can take a marker. It can be a watercolor marker like what I'm holding up here. You prefer Crayola, or if you have none of that and just have a pen, that's okay too. But I really like this art intervention because to start, if for someone who might be very nervous about art, all you do is you outline your hand on a sheet of paper. One hand is going to represent everything that you're holding on to that's associated with your past. And then your other hand, the right hand, is going to represent what you're hoping for the future, right? So the idea behind it is you have these hands in front of you, and then once you have the outline on your sheet of paper in place, you go back and you think about, what are some things about your past that are still lingering, and you try to capture that. Sometimes it might bring up emotions, and that's okay. It's okay to sit with the feeling, or thoughts or memories, and just contain it on that hand and know that that's going to be a hand you're letting go of, right? And then the other hand, you're looking forward. You're thinking about, what do I want more of in my life going forward? How can I hold on to it? And there's no right or wrong way to go about this, because this is all about you and getting to know what's important. There's a quote. There's a poet called Young Pueblo, and there's a quote of his that I really like, and it goes like this: letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It just means we stop carrying the energy of the past into the present. And so this quote, I really think it works well for this exercise, because even though you're letting go of this one hand, everything that's happened on the left, it's not necessarily denying it or disowning it. It just means you're letting go of that energy so that it doesn't affect your future. And so it's one of my favorites because I think it is pretty accessible, and it leads into the art activity that I would like to invite all our viewers to take part in today.
So I love the healing hands because, like you said, it's here, and specifically during this time of high anxiety, high stress, high frustration. I mean, I'm trying to work. My wife's trying to work. 2 kids are trying to go to school. So we weren't, a month ago, I wouldn't even say a week ago, weren't ready for all this. But I think in all of this, the anxiety, what do you need to let go? Like right now, my frustration was internet just dropped on me. Well, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't go into my office, which has way better internet. I've got to let go of that perfection. And then on the keep side is, positivity, the fact that the sun is still shining and being thankful for that. So what a great exercise for us, for sure, to do with, clients and different people, but also for ourselves. So real quick, I want to pause and make sure that if anybody has questions, please let us know. I want to take a couple questions as soon as we can for Nina. Nina, by the way, who is that quote by again? Young Pablo?
Yes, and his name is he spells it Yung, and last name Pueblo, Pueblo.
Okay, I'm going to send that to the audience here so they'll have that. Okay. So I just want to, just for a moment, if you have any questions, please let's hit the Q&A button and ask Nina questions that you'd like to have answered, and I'll pull those up for her. Jennifer asks, thanks for mentioning My Canvas. Are there other local organizations that you recommend art therapists to connect with? And I assume they might be thinking of Nashville. But I want to say, too, there's people not just from Nashville. Are there national organizations that do similar things like that you know of? And then also just ask specifically about Nashville, too.
In Nashville, the main one that comes to mind is My Canvas. There are other organizations throughout the United States. I can't think of any specifically. However, I'm happy to get that information. And I know that there is going to be a blog going up after the webinar. And so we could post some links and resources. We'll also include some links and resources to the Art Therapy Organization and the Art Therapy Credentials Board as well.
We'll be sending out, after the replay is up and the post is up, for those of you that have registered for this webinar, you'll get an email with that in probably the next couple of days. But if you go to integrativelifecenter.com/network, at the top of the menu bar, by the way, is a link that says resources for therapists. Click that. That's our network site where the recording for this and other resources we're doing for our community of therapists, treatment centers, and those of us that are either alumni in treatment. We're all providing resources for that, so you can check those out there too, but we will send you an email afterwards. Okay, so Samantha asks, can you speak a little bit more about how to maintain connection through conducting arts therapy sessions via telehealth? That has been a struggle for me doing art therapy with kids and adolescents who do not have access to reliable technology. That's a tough one. If I can speak to the technology side for a second, Nina, they may not have access to good internet. If the next step is if they have a phone and the ability to do, oftentimes you have a cell phone in most American households, but that could be another step if they don't have reliable or even internet in their house. Maybe they have access to a phone that does have cell phone access and internet access. And whether on Android, there's video apps you could use there, and also, of course, with iPhone. But Android in particular being way bigger market base, maybe that could be a fallback too. So from the therapy side, and I get it, we're in this unprecedented time where we can't meet face-to-face right now, and we're trying to do our best. But any thoughts about from the therapeutic side, Nina? I can speak probably more to the technology sometimes, but the therapy or any other thoughts you have on that question.
Yes. So if a client is becoming distracted during the session, or they seem like they might be losing engagement, try to bring them back to the exercise, even if it's just through asking a question and meeting them in the here and now. Trying to find out, like, how are you enjoying the supplies you're working with? And they might say, I like using chalk pastel, or I like using oil pastel. This is good. Like, kind of getting them back into that moment. And then as they're working, reminding them to approach it as a mindful task, so that they're not being distracted by anything else that they might be distracted by. So trying to get them back into the moment by having them talk about, the feel of the pastel on their paper. How does the watercolor feel as you glide the brush across the page? And then as far as like whatever the topic might be, whether it's gratitude, when you're there in person, one of the benefits is you can walk right up to someone over a screen. You're doing the best you can to see what's going on, but trying to reinforce. So what comes up for you as you're working on your art? And then also trying to get people to sense not just emotions, but where they might feel things just like in their body. Maybe we're doing the healing hands and they're addressing imagery from their past. And maybe they might feel sensations, maybe like a tightening in their chest, or maybe a knot in their stomach. and just having them sit with that. It's important to also try to get them to go through that therapeutic process even while you're not there, but remaining very present, and continuing to ask those important questions as they're working, but then also pausing to give them that space to explore whatever might be going on within, and also be in that moment and work with the tools in front of them. I hope that helps.
Oh yeah. And Barbara kind of asked a question that I was thinking about, and I'm glad she asked it. Do you think it works to give an art project as homework for the next session? And maybe you don't use homework, but like, something, I'm just thinking of those that don't have internet's tough. Well, turn off video potentially and go with just audio, which is tough, I know. But this is a great thought that I'd love to hear your feedback on, is maybe something they can do in between being able to talk and see and converse with the therapist.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to the Altered book, something that could be like a long-term project like this could work as homework as well. So thinking about things that might take a little bit of time, so that way that initial session could be the start of a project. Even collage making, a lot of times someone can create, I'll hold up another collage. This is an example of a soul collage style card. Even with collage making, I had clients at ILC create one of these during one of the sessions, and then continue to create more. And the concept behind the soul collage cards is you're making almost like a deck of cards that have to do with you. And so I've had actually several sessions with clients where we would start one there, and then they would make several more to process different things or to represent different things, and then bring them back to future sessions. So that was a great question.
Yeah, I love the aspect of kind of the journal, approach to, is take the altered book concept and, hey, do a page. And then when you meet next, something that you can talk me through how, it's kind of a chronological, what a journal is, right? Let's see here. There's another question I wanted to make sure I asked here. And I think, how would you handle it if a client begins to experience overwhelming emotions during the creative process? So now we're talking again too, we're not there knee to knee with them, but thoughts about how you would, overwhelming type emotions within the therapeutic process.
Absolutely. So, and I'll answer this kind of like in two parts. So if you are there in person, sometimes you can start to see when it might happen before someone becomes overwhelmed, and you can tell sometimes just like with the body language. Maybe their body tenses up, their facial expression changes. Someone may also come to a group already feeling overwhelmed based on a previous therapy session, or maybe they had a really challenging day. So with that type of session, I would try to introduce grounding techniques. For people who are not familiar with grounding techniques are ways to try to regulate your nervous system, so you can get to a place where you're not flooded with emotions. If I were there in person, and say if a person becomes tearful, in therapeutic act would be to just kind of just hold space, and it's okay to let them cry and feel that emotion. Now, if they become so overwhelmed that they might become harmful to themselves or others, then definitely you want to try to de-escalate and support the best way you can right then and there. And a lot of times the grounding techniques will work, asking someone to take deep breaths to help regulate themselves. And if the artwork is too intense, letting them know they can come back to it later, or maybe they need to not work on that right now, and could we work on something else that might be more soothing? Maybe it might be a situation where playing certain music might help regulate someone. Um, so just trying to address the situation right then and there. And that's how I would address it if I was there in person. Now through Zoom, um, it would be similar. Like, I wouldn't be able to be there in person to hand someone a tissue. However, we can still go back to the grounding techniques. Some grounding techniques can include deep breathing that will activate the parasympathetic nervous system. There's something called box breathing, where you breathe for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. You can also do grounding by focusing in on your body. So some stretches, even stomping on the floor. Some people enjoy that. There's another grounding technique that I really love. I learned this from a yoga trauma therapist, and it's called a butterfly hug. For the therapists out there who are familiar with EMDR, there's some roots in EMDR with this. What you do is you take your hands, you cross them over yourself, and you do some gentle tapping. I have had a lot of success with clients experiencing anxiety, and they were able to calm themselves down with this simple motion. Just a little butterfly hug.
That's
And
great.
that's how I would approach it.
You know, from the video side, particularly, my coach actually, when we're in session, and I mentioned this before, make sure the video of me, the client, is as big as possible on the screen in order to try to, as best as possible, discern emotions, discern, intonation, things like that. And again, headphones help too, making sure you can take as much as you can in without being there in person. But those are some of the ways that I've heard and seen and practice. And also with the full screen, whether it's the client in full screen mode, that means, something on their desktop isn't distracting them, a tab that all of a sudden goes off. And then for you as the therapist, pulling it up, you get as much as you can into the experience as possible. These have been some excellent takeaways and tips for us, Nina. I so appreciate you. We have about 3 minutes. If you have a parting question for Nina, please let me know and I'll offer it up to her. I know, Nina, you had a part of this as exercise. I'm going to see when we can get some time after this and do that recording so we can post it and pair with the recording of this video. I have a ton of takeaways talking about art therapy as being able to access emotions. You gave us some fantastic exercises that we can do. The altered book stuff has kind of got me thinking. I love books, so my heart just tightens up just a little bit when I see a book, but I'm sure there's a book in my library that I'm like, I'm never going to read that again, and can use it from the, how'd you call it? The blackout, poetry or something like that. I've loved that, and collages, and using that as a journal. We talked about the healing hands, which we can do. You've given us some takeaways about watercolor markers, which I can't wait to go to Amazon after this and look up for my kids and myself. And then we gave you some practical supplies you can use using nature. So those of you that work with kids in low income, we feel for you for sure, and those children as well. But having some things accessible for them to get creative in nature, what a great way to do still art therapy and pair that. So Nina Ayala, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for the work you do in the world. Thank those of you that are here for coming and listening in and asking some really great questions. Do you have any, Nina, any parting thoughts that you want to share with our crowd before we end the webinar?
Yes, thank you all for being here and listening. Appreciate you wanting to learn more about art therapy, and I hope this has been helpful for you. And remember, everyone's creative. Just feel free to let your creativity and your inner self shine through your art.
And by the way, this is brought to you by integrativelifecenter.com. And ILC, you are a therapist as part of ILC that work with groups and a part of the recovery programs at ILC. So go to integrativelifecenter.com. If you have someone to refer to ILC, what a great program, and now rolling out virtual programs too. And Nina, thanks again so much. Okay, one quick question. Can you show that hands project again?
Yes, absolutely.
By the way, as she's doing this, that's the same thing you can do is, hey, while you're working, could you show your art to us, you know? So I love that. Okay, past and present, what are you holding on to? What do you need to let go?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, thanks everybody for being here today, and thanks Nina again. IntegrativeLifeCenter.com, head over there, and if we can help you, we're going to be scheduling more webinars. Already have webinars on the agenda, so make sure you go over to ILC and check out the website and what we're doing for you. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.